topic is local and global. And today we had the release of the global report. And I am very local. I come from a long way away. So not local here. But I will tell you a little bit about my setup, my place. We live at the top of the world. You see the map here. And this is the first image that came from space in 1972. You will notice that it's up the right way. It actually has Australia on the top and South Africa on the top. It's all in perceptions, isn't it? What is the top and what is the bottom? Well, it doesn't matter because we all share a world that is warming. This is the global issue. It is warming everywhere. And this we need to face together. This is the last 8,000 years here, and the range of temperatures was very small. So when was your quote coming from? How many years ago?
1,800.
Oh, that's just a tiny little blip here, yeah. So back there, and if you go back 10,000 years, you're to the early phases of the indigenous people in Europe, even the Iber, but the Sami were certainly here and continuously here for 10,000 years. In Australia, we have had a 60,000-year-old culture, still there. So that's way back here. Now they have experienced major climate change. It's in their stories. They actually talk about rising and falling sea levels. And they have adapted and survived. But we are not used to it. We are used to that, where we have just a 1 degree centigrade range, and we're heading into this. That's 2. And we must go beneath that. But we certainly can't do that. So we need to, as a globe, as a planet, not increase more than 2 degrees centigrade above the pre-industrial levels. It's already 1.1. So IPCC saying 1.5. Now, what a wonderful place that could plan to have a conference on the day that this was released. I'm sure they did. I'm sure they thought it up very cleverly. But I didn't even realise till I was here that this was the day. And I've been doing media all over the world and saying, I'm in Barcelona, as you do. It's very special to be in Barcelona for someone from Perth. So this is what's in the report. I can now tell you. This is the kind of trajectories that we've been having. You can see the increase in temperature. It fluctuates, but it's pretty much on a single route forward like that. And we don't want to do that. We need to do this. And there are signs that we could do this or we could do that. And this is the one that we need to do. We need to get in there. We need to get around the 1.5 change. Otherwise, there is going to be serious problems. What kind of problems? I'll show you in a second. But there are different trajectories of doing it. Sometimes, if we leave it too late, we'll have to come back to 1.5. How do you come back? You drag CO2 out of the atmosphere. You have carbon dioxide removal technologies sucking the CO2 out because we've gone too far. It's too hot. We need to fix it. That's a situation we don't want to get into. We want to do it gradually and clearly in time. Otherwise, these are the risks. Certainly, coral reefs are very much at risk. They are already bleaching and disappearing. About 1/3 of our Great Barrier Reef has already gone. Mangroves, a little less. Small-scale, low-latitude fisheries look as though they're changing too quickly. It's too hot. Well, there was one year when we suddenly had a 5 degrees centigrade rise in the temperature of the water all along our coast, and the fisheries just disappeared. This can happen in many places. The Arctic is warming very quickly. There are also coastal flooding issues. So these are the issues that we need to address. For a city like Barcelona and Perth, where we are used to warm temperatures, we are not used to regular 50-degree temperatures. That's the kind of thing that will happen. And we will have a lot more of the fires that are around in the region. Everything will dry out. And you will also have in wintertime more storm surges. There's more energy in the atmosphere than there should be. So we're getting more energetic results. Now this is the part that I was involved in, which is what is happening to try and fix it. And energy, urban, transport, industrial and land are the systems that we've been looking at. The energy system is actually very encouraging because around the world it is disrupting. Solar and wind and batteries are dramatically growing. I'll show you a bit more of the data. What we need to do is mainstream. It needs to become 100%, dramatically removing the fossil fuels in our system. The urban systems, there are good examples now where cities are showing how to do zero carbon. We know how to do it. We need to mainstream it now. And including the informal settlements, the slums of the world. They can actually change as well in that direction. Transport, electric vehicles are happening very quickly. But freight, aviation, shipping is not hardly changing. They are the laggards. They are not doing enough to support the world in this. And they're also hard to govern. Who manages international air aviation or international shipping? It's a loose connection of countries that try to regulate it. But it's hard. It's part of the global system that's not working very well. Industrial, there are minor examples of good low-carbon systems developing, but not many. The big industries, like steel and cement making, they're still the same way they've done it for hundreds of years. It needs to change. Carbon sequestration was promised to us by industry to say, yes, we will do that. So we can keep doing it, but we'll take carbon and bury it. It's almost a complete failure. LNG production, for example, is just not doing what they said they would do in terms of sequestering carbon. So there's a lot more to do in here. And land, across the world, there is still too much carbon being cut from the landscape rather than being put back into it. Deforestation is still bigger than reforestation. It's not in Europe. In Europe, there's more reforestation. In America, in Australia, they are actually big carbon going back into the landscape, but not in the developing world. So that's the story across the world. Some hope, but also some very slow development in other areas. So it can make you rather despairing. It's possible to say, we're not going to make it. We are going to leave for our children and grandchildren a world that is much harder to live in, and the economies of the world are going to struggle in that because we're outside our comfort zone. But is it possible? to do things locally that will have a global impact. These are the questions I want to quickly go through. How can planning, because planning is really what local is all about. I was an elected local government councillor for 4 years. That's when I learned about planning locally, how you can do things. And it was very exciting, actually. And you can bring about changes there. How does biophilic design cool cities? How do cities bounce forward while bouncing back from climate disasters? What are the big changes that are happening now? Can the theory of urban fabrics help? We talked about this today, and I think it can help us to understand the future. What are the areas in climate change policy that still need big changes? So this is my book, Overcoming Fossil Fuel Dependence, as the subtitle of Resilient Cities. How can we warm them? Well, we need to do the adaptation along with the mitigation, natural capacity building and sustainability. I've talked about this a lot. Exploitive cities, we've done these for a long time, especially in the industrial area. We have made wealth associated with ever-increasing footprint. Sustainable cities came around 20 years ago, a little longer, and it was wealth associated with reducing ecological footprint. What we need to move towards is wealth associated with regenerating. We're actually improving the environment. And together, that's a resilient city. A quick story. This is my town here, right on the bottom part of the continent of Australia. That whole area there is the size of Western Europe, and there's 2 million people in it. 2.5 million. 2 million live in the one city of Perth. And like Cape Town down here, you can see the weather that comes along the base here is coming from what are called the Roaring Forties. So when the Spanish and the Dutch and the English and the French all took their boats down here and around the Cape and went down here, this was the freeway they joined into. It pushed them across the world, and those Roaring Forties brought rain to Cape Town and to Perth. But now the hot air from the tropics is hotter, and it's going up and further south and further north as well. So it's pushing the Roaring Forties down. They're now missing our coast. And all the climate models of the last 40 years predicted that we would lose rainfall in Perth and Cape Town. Now, what did we do in Perth? Fortunately, we had some engineers who noticed this trend. You see how it was going there, and then it started dipping down and then dipping down, and then in a couple of years, no rainfall at all, the whole year. I was actually working in the state government during that 2000 year, and it was terrible because we're constantly looking, oh, it's got to rain soon, and it just didn't. So it was a big political issue. What do we do? And the engineers did have plans. They had plans to show how we could do things differently, and we did. This was the groundwater. We couldn't take more groundwater because it was going down too, of course. So we desalinated the ocean. Now, this hadn't been done on a large scale before in a few Saudi Arabian cities. But this now is providing 55% of the water supply in Perth. It's wind-powered, and it hasn't actually cost very much. So it has saved our city, but we got going on it well before the real crisis came, whereas Cape Town didn't. Cape Town kept putting it off. They were told the same thing, but they didn't act. Now they're desperately acting. and hopefully they'll be able to solve it. But it is an issue that's not going to be solved. It's not going to come back. This is a city which could have been abandoned. Our next step was recycling sewage. The whole of the city is going to be recycling the sewage back into the groundwater, and what's called water-sensitive urban design. That is where you use natural systems much more in how you manage the water cycle. This is our new amazing stadium. Vitoria-Gasteiz is one of the best cities in the world for water-sensitive urban design. It is something dry cities have to do. You have to use the water well, recycle it, manage it with natural systems. That's going to have to need more attention, not less. The technology of getting desalination is not enough. You need to do all these other things. Singapore is a city that also needs more water. They get rainfall in that area, but they don't have a big enough catchment. So they've decided to make their own water supply, and they did it by doing things like making this into a reservoir. It was part of the Singapore River, and they dammed it, put a barrage across, which can also be opened up if there's flooding, or if there's a storm surge, it can be stopping that. So it acts as a resilience adaptation, but it also is providing clean water for the city. And that is a local solution, a local adaptation, a local resilience system. And let me just explain this. This is my city in Fremantle. That area there was a rubbish dump in our city. It was also quite a sacred site for Indigenous people. So we worked with them to revegetate this. They have stories about this kind of thing. And the stories are about what it was like when they had more coastal flooding. And it's all about ensuring that there is vegetation there. You don't touch that, you don't cut that. And so this is part of the resilience strategy. But it's also just doing what is sensible. You are making a better city. This is now a place that is sacred to us. We go there for various ceremonies, and the Indigenous people have their ceremonies here as well. This is an area in the south where a songline goes. I don't know if you know a songline, but that's the GIS systems of 60,000 years. It's mapping, and it's in a song, and it tells you about the landscape, and you walk through it and it tells you that landscape, and it goes through here. So we are learning to restore those landscapes, and they become special sites. So there's multiple objectives that come out of it. So biophilic, what is biophilic about? Biophilic is something that was invented by E.O. Wilson. It means that we need nature in our daily lives. If you look around in this building and most buildings, nature is not here. We shut it out. There are now ways of bringing it inside the building and onto the buildings. So you can do things like this, where you actually have greenery on the roof, on the balconies, on the walls. We made a film called Singapore Biophilic City, and it's a 45-minute film, and it's had 200,000 hits on YouTube. It's very easy to find. But it was made with Tim Beatley and the students of Singapore. We interviewed all the people who are responsible for this, because in their planning system now, they insist that you replace the floor plate of a building 3 times by greenery on the building and inside the building. So greenery being brought into the city has many things it does. First of all, it air conditions the city. It's about cooling the city. It also brings biodiversity back in because you've got whole new niches, habitats that you didn't have before. It's like a forest, a big tall forest. And some of these buildings are very spectacular. This building was empty. They couldn't lease it. So an architect came and designed a green wall, which was put on, and immediately the balconies came out into the green area, and Google and Facebook rented it out because it's very cool. So cooling the city and being a cool place to work and live is something that we need to do. It is part of an adaptation and mitigation strategy because it cools the buildings as well. It's part of the insulation. And it is quite manageable and not expensive. This is a hospital which has found that healing rates are better. So there are multiple objectives. Lots of good come from it, but it is also saving carbon and adapting the city for the warming that is going to come anyway. And these are pretty spectacular. This is in Milan, a forest in the sky. Unlikely to do too many of them. So how do we bounce forward while bouncing back? Because when there's a disaster, you say, oh, we've got to bounce back. Resilience is bouncing back. No, I think we need to not just bounce back, we need to bounce forward by rebuilding without fossil fuels, because that's the future. And there are ways of doing it. This is a disaster in New Zealand, and this is a professor there who said it's time for myriad, decentralised, small-scale, clean tech-powered, info-tech-enabled ways. That's a professor speaking, isn't it? But you get the idea. It's localised technologies. Instead of a big system being replaced, do it in small pieces. And I'll illustrate quickly. But for a start, solar and wind are generally localised. When Hurricane Florence came through recently, it crippled electricity and coal, but solar and wind were back the next day. They bounced back well, and they're bouncing forward as well. So the question is, what scale works best? Now, there are 3 scales you can have, and one is more of an individual scale, where you work as a house or a small neighbourhood, perhaps with a community garden, and this is what's called permaculture. Permaculture has been around for some time. And it's got its value, but it only works in certain parts of the city. You have to have a lot of space for this. And it's not always shared. It's often an individual doing all the work, pumping their own, blowing the air into the sail to make it work. It's also not very equitable. So localised solutions are a bigger scale than that. If you imagine the Barcelona precincts that were designed and developed in the last 100, 200 years, they are the kind of scale I'm talking about. Several hundred housing units together. They share a courtyard, right? That's the way they were designed, with the shared space. They can also share electricity now. They can share water systems, they can share waste systems, and they can share mobility. And I'll explain that. The big systems are very wasteful. The energy is wasted going through it. Generating electricity, 2/3 of it's lost just going from the major coal-fired power station all the way to the city. 32% lost in the distribution. Big water systems also have lots of waste. Big landfill systems waste. So that's a linear system. We all know that we need to have circular economy. And I think you're going to do more about that in a later system. What I'm talking about, though, is a new set of technologies here that are part of what's called the sixth wave of innovation. And each of these waves are associated with they come out of an economic decline, and they come out of the 1840s, the 1890s, the 1930s, and these ones more recently. And this is the fifth wave is the digital one, and the sixth wave is this sustainability wave. And these are where we can develop local shared technologies. And let me explain. Each of these waves have a different business model. This one's called glocalization. It's a pretty awful word, but global and local together. Jeremy Rifkin has written books about this, and he's very good about glocalization and how it works. So each of these waves had different energy sources and different transport systems. So we can expect different models, different ways of thinking about it, different energy sources and different transport in this next wave. So what are the big changes and how are they fitting into this? First of all, the solar, batteries, blockchain, EV dance. And it is a dance because people are creatively enjoying this transition, and also decoupling. This is the way in which we used to see the world out of control. See, this is the growth in greenhouse gases with all of them going up. But that was the year 2000. And now we've got a new century, and since about 2000, we've started to grow in wealth and not grow so much in greenhouse gases. So for the last 3 years, greenhouse gases have gone down slightly. We've gone over the top. We have peaked. Now, many people didn't think that would happen, especially if wealth was continuing to rise. But GNI, gross national income, or GDP, which are pretty much the same, except you can measure this easier, is just measuring our human activity. Mostly it's measured around money, but it is about activity. And if that's going to go up because we are introducing green technologies and green ways of doing things, then it will decouple, because we are showing now how to grow in that, but not that. Now that's the transition beginning. The IPCC report today is really covering that period here, where we weren't sure that that was happening, but now we are. So decoupling is actually in the report. Not a big part of it, but it's there. Because it's a little bit hard for many of us in the IPCC to be too excited about change. We want to be a little bit scared because otherwise people won't change. But actually, I prefer to push the hope side. And one of the ways of looking at it is to see that in Europe, and there are many places like Denmark, which have done this quite dramatic change where coal and oil have both been going down. It took about 5-6 years, maybe 10 years even, to learn how to do this, because GDP wasn't growing there, but it then took off because they're exporting windmills and they're doing wonderful walkable cities and bicycles and new trains, and all of the green technologies are happening, and it's helping the growth, but they're going down. So we're decoupling. That's mostly the European story. In the US, they're doing it too. Despite Mr. Trump, this is coal and oil going down, and wealth is going up. He wants to make America great by bringing coal back. That will absolutely not work because, like most places, they are learning to do without fossil fuels. And that's the nature of the growth that's now setting in. In Australia, we've grown a lot faster than in the US. And coal is also going down and oil is peaked. So we are also learning, a bit slower than in Europe, but better than in India, for example, which is an emerging country. It's putting a lot of effort into its development, so it's growing very quickly now in GDP, but these are decoupling, but not absolutely decoupling. But they've got big programs to bring solar and electric vehicles and so on into their system. They're putting in major train systems. And in China, they have really demonstrated leadership in this area. Significant economic growth, and both of these plateauing. Coal actually went down there for a year and is now slightly back up. So, how is this happening? It's happening through disruptive innovation. This is the term that's being used to explain how these changes are happening. Now, we've got various papers on this, which I can send anyone, but I give away all my PowerPoints, so you don't have to take pictures of it. It'll all be available to you on the website, I'm sure, on ReCity's website, right? And this is a new book that's coming out on it as well. So disruptive innovation, it's a term that was invented by Clayton Christensen at Harvard. It's essentially about demand-led change rather than supply. So if an innovation comes along and it's a reasonable price, but it's still not the cheapest thing, if people like it, they'll buy it and it'll put the rest out there. And the best example he gave was floppy disks. Some in the audience will know what a floppy disk is, but a floppy disk was the first memory. And there were two versions of it, the 5.5-inch one or the 3.5-inch one. This was cheaper, but everyone liked this one because you could put it in your pocket or your purse, and that then led to carrying your computer rather than having a great big one. So we changed the whole system based around the fact that people preferred that. So now we carry our computers everywhere. And that's the transition that is called disruption. And if you don't follow it, you get stranded assets. Kodak invented the digital camera, but didn't commercialise it because they thought it wouldn't sell. And they had all these other analogue cameras that they would prefer. So they went bankrupt. There's no guarantee any company is going to survive, right, Mr. Banker? They don't. If they don't make the right decisions, they don't adapt to the future, they are stranded, they disappear. And that will happen to companies that say, we are going to stick with coal, oil and gas, because that is going to leave you stranded. What I'm seeing is that the disruptions in this area are local solar batteries and blockchain, which is a software that enables you to share solar and batteries together, and what Jeremy Rifkin calls the energy internet. That's how you share it. And electric cars, electric bikes, electric transit, which is together is local shared mobility. And that's the transport internet that helps you to do that. Now these are just on the edge technologies, but we've now got enough of them to see they're working. It's the kind of thing that Barcelona now needs to demonstrate. So solar grew 66%, wind 30%, batteries 50%. That's in our report because that's come from the UN IRENA report, and it shows a dramatic increase. That's disruption when you get that kind of growth. So the world's financiers and bankers, they're buying solar and wind mostly. That's where the investment is happening. So Bloomberg, and he's written this beautiful book, just come out, How Cities, Businesses and Citizens Can Save the Planet. That's what we're on about tonight, isn't it? Because this wonderful organisation brings them together, cities, businesses and citizens together. That's how you save the planet. And this is all about those stories. But he was the mayor of New York. He's also one of the world's wealthiest people. And his Bloomberg New Energy Finance has done these numbers, which show solar going from 4 to 29% and coal from 31% to 16% in a very short period. And already they're revising that and saying, we were too conservative. So Spain has done a lot with renewable energy, and it was a world leader in this. 43% of electricity in 2014. It's mostly centralised. See, that's the grid-based, that's the scale that works at a grid level. That's not the localised level I'm talking about. So maybe the next step in Spain is to take these localised technologies and start putting them into your cities, like Barcelona. How do we do it? Let me just tell you what's happened in my city, which is not planned, no program, no government intervention. This is Perth, and this is where most of the solar has been put in. The outer suburbs, they're poorer suburbs, they've got bigger roofs and bigger houses with bigger air conditioning bills. So they went for solar in a big way, and 30% of homes in 7 years put rooftop solar on their roof. And it was cheap enough. It wasn't the cheapest form of electricity, but it was cheap enough and they loved it. So they bought it. Disruptive. 1,000 megawatts now. That is the biggest power station in Western Australia. There are 3 coal-fired power stations now in the grid, and on some days they have to turn them off because it's just not being used. The solar's covering it. It's extraordinary. No program. People choosing it. But small businesses set it all up. And I'll come to it in a moment, but we've been monitoring how it works. This is a place called Josh's House. There's been 40 million hits on that website, joshshouse.com.au, because he built this house as a solar design, and it's got 70 channels of monitoring. And you can look at it any time to see how much energy and water and where it's being used and how it links in to the electric vehicle they've got. It's a full story about what an individual house can do. This is the battery system, and this is what the kind of results you get. See, this is what happens when you put in a that's the demand profile there. That's the average day demand. That's across Perth. That's the demand profile. So if you have a battery on a solar PV, it's filling up here, and then it drops down as you start to use it, and then it goes back out again. And it means that you cut off the times of the day when you need power and the sun's not out. So it eases you through that period. But there are times when there's not enough sun and you need the grid. And there's lots of times when you've got more than you need. So you need the grid to put it back in and make money from it. So we need the grid. You do not want to be self-sufficient in a city, because getting solar and batteries enough to make you independent is incredibly expensive, because it gets exponentially more expensive as you get closer to that last bit. And so you need to share. You need to share using a grid. But this place is carbon positive. It makes more renewable energy than it consumes. And it was not expensive. And this is now the electric vehicle that's attached to it as well. Now, what about a bigger development? This is called WGV, White Gum Valley. This is 100 units. It is also carbon positive. It makes more renewable energy than it consumes. All of these places have solar and batteries in the buildings. But it's shared because it's a shared roof. And many of us live in apartments where you have to share things, right? Well, this is sharing the power and you're sharing the battery. How do you share that? You share it with blockchain and you create what's called a citizen utility. It's also social housing in here. It is something really important to see. There's one little development there called SHAC, S-H-A-C, Sustainable Housing for Artists and Creatives. Because artists usually get pushed out of the city. Well, this was a place where they could live and have all these green technologies, and it works. And they have a shared electric vehicle as part of their development. So this is blockchain. It is the energy internet. It allows what's called peer-to-peer trading. And it's automatically done. It's programmed in, so you join that network and it enables you to have your power, when you have excess power, put into a grid and sold where it's needed, or to bring it back in at certain times. And that's managed through this software. The person who developed this set up a company called Power Ledger, and they're now getting work all around the world. So you get a good demonstration project, you will make money out of it and you will certainly create a lot of employment. It is not going to damage the economy to go down that track. It's also got multiple other benefits. This was a place that was all fenced off because that's where the stormwater went. When it rains, it really rains in Perth, and you've got to have a place for the stormwater to go. And that's been made into a park. So all across the area, people love this new development. And it's certified with One Planet Living. It's a certification system that enables you to get lots of local benefits, as well as zero carbon here, which is one of the top goals. So local planning in these things, it enables innovation. Each of those projects were a risk. You have to take a risk. You need to be an entrepreneur, actually, in this era to create this new economy. Community engagement, it went from not in my backyard to please in my backyard. Now that's pretty important in planning and local things. Accreditation was needed. You needed a structure plan to put it in the system, and you had to show that it's sold. If it hadn't sold, it would have been a disaster. We were very involved in it. We would have lost a lot of reputation. So we were very pleased it sold because people clearly want sustainability. They want green technology and green buildings. And this is yet to happen, but maybe a local utility can be created that manages a series of these things together. So the next stages are interesting because we're going to go to 1,000 units and demonstrate that. And this one is jumping into the future. This is my house with our PVs on the roof. We don't have a battery. Batteries are actually a bit too expensive still for individuals. They're better shared. So the utility has decided to put in community batteries. So each precinct area has a community battery, and the substations have community batteries. And you link into that, and you share your power, your renewable energy in that local area. So that local area is becoming zero carbon, but we didn't have to completely rebuild the place. It was actually refitting what's there. This is a 140-year-old house. So we've refitted and we've joined in to a green new future. The utility is now saying, that worked pretty easily. Why can't we spread that across the whole city? And they're now talking about doing it maybe 3 to 5 years. The whole city will be able to be zero carbon based on solar, batteries, electric vehicles fitting in there somewhere as well, and being able to share it. And they would manage that process, manage the flows of electrons in both directions. It's a new world, but it's not that different, is it? It's imaginable. We're close to that now. What about doing it in informal settlements like these? It's possible to put solar into them. But you can also just do green enclaves with poor places that never get it. This is in South Africa. This is in Addis Ababa, where we had a PhD working on these communities, and the communities are very keen to do it. They want to join in and have these new technologies because they don't want to go into big high-rise buildings because they lose their community structure. The community looks after and manages these new technologies. So it fits, and you can rapidly do it. Electric vehicles are growing 40% a year. And if that keeps going, then it's a very dramatic change. I was in Norway for the last week. Nearly 30% of vehicles are now electric. And it's so nice to not have all that nasty noise that you hear out in the street here and in my streets. I don't think we'll regret it when diesel and petrol engines are something in the past. Electric vehicles are better and they have very little fuel needs. So this is our prediction for the future, very rapid decline, and by 2026 you might find it very hard to buy a new gasoline or diesel powered vehicle. That's 8 years away. And that's a prediction based on the fact that many of the motor vehicle manufacturers are now making that transition. They're saying, yeah, we can do it now. We're ready. And it's possible to make it zero carbon. You can put these on car parks. There's lots of car parks around where you can do that. So this is an interesting graph. This is the way solar has gone, and this is the predictions, the projections from the World Energy Outlook by the International Energy Agency. That's the main planning agency for energy in the world. They didn't exactly get it right. Every time it grew, they'd say, oh, it'll flatten out, it'll flatten out, it'll flatten out, it'll flatten out. Oh, it's still going up. Because it's very hard to predict the future when you haven't seen it before. This is a disruptive innovation. It's taking over. So you have to actually have a different approach which begins to imagine what that future could be like and say, that's what it could be like. The mathematicians and economists got it wrong because they were projecting from a past. It's not going to be our future. So this is what I think is likely to be the future, that we will keep growing in wealth, that CO2 will go down, all the way down by 2050 to be significantly less than what we use now. Renewables keeps growing all through that period. Coal goes first, then oil, then gas. And these transitions will be fought all the way because the industries involved don't want to change. but they're being forced to. And the new emerging industries that are associated with this can rapidly see that they're going to be the ones causing that. So I believe there is a productive future possible. And I'm not finished yet, but I'm not far off. Can you give me a few more minutes? Because you guys took a long time at the start. You want me to finish? Okay. This is lithium. Very big growth. People worry about that because they say, we're going to run out of lithium like we're going to run out of oil and other battery minerals. Let me just show you. This is the battery minerals, all the metals that are needed for batteries. Which place has them most? Australia. In fact, Western Australia's got them all. So we have a big role to play down here, and we like it. We think this is going to be the California of the new energy market, and we are calling it Lithium Valley. Because we want to enable this transition to occur in the world. We're going to make money out of selling those minerals, but we're also going to process them more and develop the battery industry and the use of the batteries and the recycling of the batteries, which is very easy to do. That's what lithium looks like, by the way. It's very beautiful. And it is rapidly going to be the basis of our economy for the future. So what is not disruptive innovation are autonomous vehicles that are just put into the system like this. This is autonomous vehicles here doing 100 kilometres an hour with 1 metre between them. That's what we're promised by the vehicle industry. A great platoon of vehicles just charging through our cities. Would you want to be a pedestrian right there with a 100 kilometre an hour troop of vehicles going past? How do you get across? It actually isn't very good for cities. Maybe down a freeway, you could imagine that, but not in the cities. So we have to make decisions about this new technology. It's not just, whoa, it's going to fix everything. That's the vehicle industry speaking there. So we need to get more of this. We need autonomous technology, which is now happening in transit systems. And electric bikes in China especially, these are the electric little shuttles that are all autonomous. And this is a trackless tram. It's just come out of China. I went and rode it just recently, and I'm going to show you a few pictures of it, because it's about local shared mobility. And when I get to that, I have to tell you about theory of urban fabrics first. Theory of urban fabrics has come out of our work over a number of years. These are our books that we've written, and I won't go into it in great detail, but we collect data on cities. Here's Barcelona, how little energy it uses compared to Atlanta and Houston, and even Perth up here. These are the European cities, these are the Asian cities that have very little energy use per capita. But Barcelona is the lowest in Europe. You win, yes, you've got to keep up this reputation. And it's not hard to see why. See, this is classic car-dependent urban sprawl, and it's very different to Barcelona, right? It's a different fabric altogether. And it's all about density. So the density of Barcelona is 200 people per hectare, the densest city in Europe. And people love it, of course. So we've found that there's an exponential relationship between car use and density. And we call these walking cities, these transit cities, and these automobile cities. And the same thing we found within the city. So within the city, these are the car-based parts, these are the transit parts, and these are the walking parts. And you can see it in any city. So this is Sydney. That's the walking city. That's the wealthy part of our city. And these green parts are the transit parts. And you can see they go along train lines out here. They use cars half of a lot more, but half of these, because these areas are totally car dependent. The politics in every Australian city is now, they want new railways built out here. They do not want to just have car dependence any longer. So we've come up with this theory based on the fact that we've got 3 cities in every city: the walking city, the transit city, and the car-based city. And you need to respect and rejuvenate all of them together. And you can imagine this in Barcelona, right? You've clearly got a walking city. Then it goes out along corridors that have good transit. And then out there is very car-based. Every city's like that. But you've got a lot more walking and transit city than most of our cities. We only have small amounts of them. You go to Tokyo and they've got huge amounts of walking city. And the best metro system, the best transit system in the world. 38 million people living here. And there's hardly any car use. The tram city fabric follows corridors. The train city fabric tends to follow pearls on a string, hugging freeways usually, and shopping centres. Now, what we're finding is, and in all our studies of cities, they want more like this. They want to have the services that a transit system brings, and they want it easily. They don't want to pay a lot of money for it. So the future city is about having these centres all through the suburbs. And it's got to be walkable, and I'll go through this quickly. So regenerating the walking city, this is not regenerating the walking city, this is a travesty at Curtin, Calcutta. Fancy putting a freeway through the middle of that beautiful walking city. Fortunately, they took it out. This is in Seoul. They put a freeway down a sacred river, destroying it, and then removed it, and made a 10-kilometre long beautiful green park called the Chongachang. And it's very famous now. Very cool, very biophilic. Restored the river. And most cities are trying to regenerate their walking city. That's in New York. Jan Gehl has done it in many cities, including Copenhagen. Most people want that. And there are good reasons for it economically. The top 6 most walkable cities in the US have 38% higher GDP. So it works. Rejuvenating the transit city is about bringing more transit in. They're doing it in American cities, right out into suburbs like Tyson's Corner in Washington, DC. So across the world, we are now seeing a global growth in rail, both in Chinese cities, Indian cities, the Middle Eastern cities even. And this is what I want to show you. This is the Trackless Tram. It costs 1/10 of a light rail. You can see the batteries on the roof. No catenary. Why is it trackless? Because it's actually taken some innovations from high-speed rail and put it in a bus. And that's a bus, but in fact it's got all the character of a light rail. It's fast and very stable, and you can ride it and see the difference. And let me take you to it. This is riding a trackless tram. You can see it's going fast, 70 kilometres an hour, and it's hardly rocking. And the best test is that the parents are not grabbing for the kids because it's safe. It's got all of that solid, it's got railway type bogies and hydraulics, and it's got beautiful precision guidance. It's guided by GPS to a millimetre, so it comes into stations perfectly. And when the driver is there, this is how he drives. Now, you can see it's significantly better. Now, if you get to a point where you need to go around a blockage or a barrier or an accident, you can put it into override and do that and drive it to a depot or something. Now we've got a model for how to pay for this out of urban regeneration. So if you want to do regenerating an area, get the developer to pay for a trackless tram as part of it. You don't need government to do it. You can actually, and we've got lots of publications on this now, because it's cheap enough to be part of a development. And that's how we used to do it. Trams and trains were private. They were real estate developments because they unlocked the development. And that's what we've been doing. So the reason for the trackless tram being better than light rail is because it's much better in cost. It doesn't disrupt. You imagine the streets out here if you're putting in a light rail. You would have to close them down for 3 years. You can't do it. This is why we don't get much light rail. And it is implemented quickly. So it's a great technology. It's a real breakthrough, I think. And in the automobile city, we still need to do things, but we also need to get better rail out into those areas. It's possible to change anything and to transform it like that. That's from a car-based city to a transit city. The final bit was about what's happening, and I quickly summarised this before, so I'm going to go quickly through this and show you why. The final word. These kind of pictures where you've got carbon being put into the landscape through forest. Around the world, we need to save them and we need to plant more. That's a very big thing, and cities can do it by going carbon neutral. It is possible to have Barcelona carbon neutral, and part of the difference between how much you save or how much renewables you put in is because you are planting out in the bioregion. Paris is carbon neutral. It's doing that. Cities can do it. And you can make cities into carbon neutral as well. These are in our city. They are ways of putting carbon into them, using song lines as well. This is Paris as a carbon neutral action plan, and how they're doing it. They've taken a lead. Why not Barcelona as well? Oslo is another city that's doing quite a bit in this area. And they've got this amazing new development out in the bioregion. This is my final slide. Innovations in cooling the planet can happen anywhere. But why not in Barcelona? Why not in this bioregion? You can lead, and you can then tell your grandchildren, this is my new grandchild. They're very cute. But when you look at it and you say 2050, that's when they're still working. And that's when they're going to say to us, why didn't you guys get going sooner? Thanks very much.